and stuff. Why in the world would you want to hear about that? No one cares. Well, listen, I'm kind of an older guy, and I don't think that any of my stories would be of interest to you. What's that? Well, okay, I think I can tell you some of that. At least kind of how I got some of my starts, because it was definitely a little different than yours. But your old metal dad, he's always got stories. Well, scoot over a little bit. Oh, that Nakmar, I just got that, yeah. Got a few to notice. So, anyways, once upon a time, there was me. When I was little, I can tell you this much. I was obsessed with music so much that rather than asking my mommy for toys, I always asked for a new cassette tape. You ever heard of cassette tapes? That's what we used to have, at least that's what I had. And I always begged for new tapes every time we went out to the store. Metal Dad would ask for new tapes. Back then it was almost all hip-hop for me because I was little and that's all I wanted to listen to. But it was always begging for new tapes. My collection was huge by the time I started 3rd grade. Anyways, I think to not make my stories too long, I will grab something to help kind of show you. You sure you're comfy? Your blankets are crooked. There you go. I will be right back, okay? Okay. What I got. Scooch you over a little bit. There you go. So, going back to a time when Metal Dad was pretty young. That's right, I used to be a lot younger. Hard to believe, isn't it? Sometimes it's hard for me to believe. Anyway, I know that I've always been kind of late to the game for my favorite things, but when I started junior high school, I believe, or middle school, that, we used to call it, I discovered this band right here. This is White Zombie. Honestly, I think the first time I ever heard White Zombie was on this TV show that I used to have to sneak and watch called Beavis and Butthead. It was a very silly cartoon, and it was about two boys that aren't very smart and laugh a lot with this really strange, goofy laugh that they have, almost like they're stoners, except they didn't really smoke weed. And other than always getting into trouble, they loved watching music videos and making fun of them. And this band, I remember, really stood out to me, and I became a White Zombie fan pretty quickly. friends that used to babysit me and stuff already knew who these guys were. But one of the earlier things from when I was a little kid that branched me outwards from just hip hop was White Zombie for sure. And to this day, this is still one of my most favorite industrial metal albums of the time. So yes, your metal dad definitely loves White Zombie. Now, in the course of those years, I started branching out and experimenting and learning about lots of different music and changing my tastes and adapting. And I didn't really like a lot of what was popular, but here, get your cover back. There you go. I do remember, to kind of flash forward a little bit, I think it was 1998 or thereabouts when I was a junior in high school, and a friend of mine had played this song for me that he thought I would really like because he knew I sort of liked electronic music and certain types of metal and whatnot. And he played a song for me called Megalomaniac by a band called KMFDM. That would be these guys right here. If you were ever going to check out this band, this would be a pretty good album to start with. And just the same way that White Zombie really had an effect on me and really kind of altered my person a little bit, I think a next big step in that process of something else that kind of altered who I am was discovering KMFDM. KMFDM, in fact, became one of my most favorite bands in my whole life, and to this day, they are still very high on that list. KMFDM also means a lot to me, so my poster on the wall of the Extort album, well, that was my first KMFDM album, but I have yet to locate that one on vinyl. But I just thought, maybe some of this awesome artwork might be worth looking at. Look here. So, there's another piece of my background that really matters. KMFDM, big in industrial metal evolution for me. Oh, I could tell you the stories that your metal dad has experienced over the years, the exploits of traveling to these concerts and some of the stuff I've seen at the shows. I've seen some wild stuff from, people puking and breaking up the mosh pit because they drank too much, to a kid getting a tooth smacked out of his mouth in the mosh pit because that's those crazy times. This is Frontline Assembly. Frontline Assembly is extremely well recognized and one of the most widely regarded pioneers in industrial electronic music. I actually discovered them by accident because I was looking at the music store one day and found a used copy of a CD of theirs called Tactical Neural Implant. This band really relies heavily on sci-fi, cyberpunk type of themes, you know. And I bought it because it looked really interesting, and that random chance ended up being another experience that altered my person. I mean, truly altered who I am. I really got heavy into Frontline Assembly, and in particular, one standout is this album right here, which is called Millennium. Because Frontline Assembly, when they did this album, shifted their sound a little bit from that classic industrial metal or industrial electronic, electro, and went metal. As far back in the 90s as this album was, at the time, this album, Millennium, was pretty groundbreaking because it really amped up the metal factor. And having gotten into KMFDM and Ministry and some other bands, this album really excited me when I discovered it. I probably wore that CD out pretty good. But lots of very sentimental and honest attachment to the band Frontline Assembly for sure, and definitely lots of memories from this album. Oh, you look like you're getting a little tired there, a little sleepy. Am I boring you to death? Well, as long as you're comfortable. As my journey kind of goes along, kind of the same era, admittedly, I would say another discovery that stood out from, being so obsessed with music. I learned and memorized and listened to, just absorbed tons and tons of music, but another pretty big standout, another one of those that, again, definitely had an effect on me, definitely contributed to altering my person. It's Ministry. Discovery of Ministry was another huge milestone for me, and this album here, with the x-ray of a skull on the front and on the back. This album is called The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste. You get it? Instead of the mind is a terrible thing to waste, the mind is a terrible thing to taste. Yep, this album right here in particular definitely altered my person a bit. Ministry put this album out when I was still pretty young, so obviously obviously I discovered it later, but the thing about this record is it further infused metal and industrial music. And as time went by, Ministry got more thrashy and more metal and just harder and harder and harder. One of their best known songs, in fact, was the album right after this one, the song Just One Fix. Maybe you should look that up sometime. Ministry, Just One Fix. Pretty well known tune. Classic metal. Ministry are respected pioneers in industrial metal, and definitely sparks up a monstrous pit at every show they play. You might see people sometimes online on videos and things like that refer to Ministry, and they always say Ministry or fucking Ministry, because Ministry is definitely hardcore. The much earlier years were definitely not. It was a growing process that started, I think, most honestly with this album here. It went more and more and more metal over the years. But anyway, this was the first Ministry record, first Ministry CD at that time I had ever heard, and I really fell in love with these guys. So Ministry is definitely another part of Metal Dad's person. Let me see. I think to cap off the high school era, some people really don't like them because they were so popular, and it's looked back on as a little too mainstream for some, but Rammstein. Everybody knows Rammstein because in the late 90s they did a song called Du Hast, which either stands for you hate or you have, depending on the translation. But the actual meaning is you hate. And in the song he basically just repeats, you hate me. Anyway, if you have never heard Rammstein's Du Hast, you should look that up. So when that hit the scene and Rammstein became very popular in America, is obviously they're a German band, but they became popular in America, and I heard Du Hast. I thought that was the most awesome shit I'd ever heard. Like, again, industrial metal evolving and changing, and it sounded so amazing. So I ran right out and picked up Rammstein's CD. And I love their approach, and I love what they're doing. And no, I don't speak German, so I was one of those people looking up the lyric translations and wanting to understand what I was hearing. On the other hand, I was also okay with not knowing every word of everything I heard, because I don't know that that's 100% required to enjoy the music. But regardless, I did want to know these things, so I was one of those looking this stuff up. And the early internet was definitely a thing of beauty, suffice it to say. But anyways, Rammstein, I really fell in love with just how wicked awesome this music was to my ears, and I've always stuck by Rammstein. So, again, if you're interested to know another piece of Metal Dad's history, it is definitely Rammstein. This was, I'm a high school kid. This was groundbreaking shit. And if you've never heard of them, just look up the song Du discography too. This album here, Sing Sucked, which stands for Desire. This album is supreme. I absolutely love every second, and I do mean every damn second of this album. And are you still with me? Oh, you look so comfy. What's that? Yeah, of course. We can definitely do that tomorrow. Absolutely. Of course I will. Well, I have one last one for you. And then I gotta go. Okay? And you gotta get to sleep. We got stuff to do tomorrow. Anyway. One unfortunate thing that I don't really want to tell you about, but I kind of have to for this to make sense, but one of my problems was anxiety and depression, and I mean dangerous depression. One time, I did in fact try to end my life, and I was locked up I was in a psych ward for a while. That was about 2 months or so of this long experience that just was really a mess. And I don't want to get into that, but I mentioned that to you, and don't worry, obviously I made it out of that okay, and I'm still here now. It's just my depression is really, really bad, and music always helped with that, but you just learn that you can always come home to metal. Always come home to metal. Metal is a place of safety, as crazy as that sounds, right? But that's where this band comes in. This is typo negative. Here's a picture. Typo negative is a pretty famous and well-known metal band that kind of, you might say, has some gothic flair to it, ironically. The lead vocalist of Typo Negative was a man named Peter Steele. He has passed away quite some time ago now, but he was really known for his extremely deep voice. And he was very tall, very muscular, and some people believed he was a real-life vampire. Typo Negative wrote a handful of kind of fun tunes here and there, but most of their metal is quite dark. And this album in particular, in my, let's say, not so healthy era, that album really, when I discovered that, really kind of connected with me and helped me. One of the many things anyway that helped me kind of process myself and get through. There's some other music that really, I would say, helped save my life a bit. But speaking of just strictly metal, Typo Negative is definitely a metal band that that means very, very much to me. It just means so much. death metal and screaming and growling so much. Although Peter Steele used to have a band like that before Typo Negative, and they are called Carnivore. And Carnivore is great.